Hello, my name is Wendy Van Hosen. I am a doctoral student with Jake's Divinity School in partnership with George Fox University. I welcome you to my project. My project is Black Women Who Serve as Senior Pastors, a guide for sustainability and access to pathways. So during my research, I'm specifically looking at the pathways that women follow who aspire or discern a call to being a senior pastor. For example, some women have become church planners. Others have come through legacy. Perhaps there was a father who was a pastor or a husband who was a pastor. And then there are those who simply kicked the door down and broke the stained glass ceiling and were selected, appointed, elected, whatever the process was for them, to become the senior pastor of a Black Baptist church. And so through my interviews, I asked 7 questions. And through these 7 questions, I was able to hear the stories, honored to hear the stories of these women as they told me about stories of perseverance, stories of endurance, stories of overcoming, and stories of thriving. These are stories that definitely need to be told. And these women are pastors, senior pastors of a Black Baptist church. And while there have been challenges, I do believe that once you hear their stories, that you will understand that their challenges have been worth it. Welcome to episode 1, where our focus will be on the journey to becoming a senior pastor as a woman in the Black Baptist Church.
Yeah, well, this is my third pastorate. So you have the privilege of talking to somebody who pastored 3 churches. So my first church was Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. Lord have mercy. That was a 121-year-old church when I went there. And page 5, paragraph 4 of the bylaws and constitution said they would never call a woman. I preached at Hampton Ministers Conference.
Okay.
That's the whole Baptist organization and stuff. So I was very steeped in Baptist, very strong in the Baptist entity and organization. And so Shiloh Baptist Church it was a great experience, 11 years, phenomenal experience. I went there and they were a wounded church. I did my doctoral degree while I was there, and it was called the Wounded Pastor Minister into a Wounded Congregation. And their wound and my wound, and God healed, and we did some amazing thing there. I licensed, I think I was the first woman to pastor a Baptist church in York, Pennsylvania, to pastor a church, an established Baptist church. And then I ordained women as deacons and women as, ministers. After 11 years, and preaching at the Potter's House, Giants Do Die, and going back there and preaching. I think I preached at the Potter's House maybe for 3 times that year. And by the 3rd time, when I went back to Shiloh, I knew that God was going to release me from that assignment. I learned that there's a difference between preaching and pastoring. Preaching is literally it's powerful, but it's just 10% of pastoring. So Shiloh really, I came in there with my head, and after 11 years, they got to my heart. You have to have your heart in there. So I don't regret it. Doctrinally, we were not on the same page. Experiencing the power of God, we were not on the same page. But some of the greatest, most powerful people and meaningful relationships. And in fact, all the sermon you heard me preach nationally now, including Giants Do Die, I practice it at Shiloh Baptist Church, the second church, about Jericho City of Praise. Jericho used to be a Baptist church.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. And then, it became, non-denominational, and I pastored there for a year. That was a mega church. And then I started my own church, which is Victory Grace Center, and that's non-denominational. So at Shiloh, I was 11 years. At Jericho, 1 year. 1 year. And of course, they had their legal battles, but also the experience was a very, very good experience because, it's a mega church, it's number 33 on the list. And what was fascinating about me was Betty Peoples, a woman, was pastoring before she died. There was she had a plaque in her office, the 100 largest church in America, and Jericho was number 30 or number 31. And she was the only woman on the list. And I think God let me go there just to see that plaque. Let me know women, Potter's House with Bishop Jakes was number 1, Joel Osteen,
right.
Creflo Dollar. You go down. And then number 30 was this one woman who wasn't even married like me. Her husband had died. She buried her children, and she built this mega campus. So sis, when I went there, I was not too sure if women can do it like that. I never seen all the women I saw pastoring, they were pastoring storefront churches, and they were climbing the rough side of the mountain. They were struggling. I'm like, I don't want that experience, God. And God brought me in there to see this, bad mama jamma, the Apostle Betty People, who single-handedly was standing shoulder to shoulder with all of these men who had mega churches. So she built, oh my goodness, the sanctuary. Well, you were there, you see it. And and then she built a college, and then she built the senior housing, and there's an exit named after her, the highway named after her. And so I said, many women have done virtual things, but she has surpassed them all. So she is like my standard bearer. So she's the standard. She's the standard in terms of a woman, an African-American woman pastoring. Betty People pastored a mega church.
I served on a staff for 15 years prior to me being called to the senior pastorate here at Shiloh. And I do think that experience prepared me in a lot of ways. I started out in 2005, full-time ministry. I went into full-time ministry in 2006. I went into ministry, like official licensed ministry, in 2003. I was licensed to preach. And I first, came on staff full-time at my home church. I was the youth minister. And then within a year, I was the youth pastor. Then within a year, I was the pastor to youth and young adults. And then within 3 years, I was basically doing the work of an assistant pastor. And so I was teaching the main Bible study every week. And I was serving, preaching the second service pretty much every week. And I did that for years, and ultimately was running like the day-to-day of that church. And I do think that all of those experiences were a training ground for what I'm doing now. I was able to learn to lead and pastor people with training wheels, I guess, before I had an opportunity or kind of be able to develop those muscles with training wheels, and when the stakes were not completely on my shoulders, so that when, I would get to Shiloh in God's plan and timing, there's some stuff that just wasn't foreign to me.
So you're fourth generation.
Fourth generation on my maternal grandfather's side. Third generation on my maternal grandmother's side.
Wow.
My great-great-great-grandfather pastored the oldest Black Baptist church in North America in Savannah, Georgia, called the First Bryan Baptist Church in 1892. And so just a plethora of sort of coming up, if you will. I grew up, my childhood pastor is the late Reverend Howard W. Creasy Sr. He co-founder of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, co-founder of the Progressive National Baptist Convention. And so I grew up hearing the first 10 years, from 10 to about 15, our revivalist was Gardner C. Taylor.
Oh, wow.
And from then it was James C. Perkins for the next 20 years. And so having that opportunity. So I started preaching, bootlegging, right? I would say it began at the Tabernacle. So I've only attended historic Baptist churches. The Tabernacle Baptist Church in Augusta, Georgia, started by Reverend C.T. Walker. So it was under the late Reverend Charles Spencer Hamilton. I was 3 years old, and I would verbatim repeat his sermons in the microphone. He told my father, who was then the chair of deacons, that you got to watch her. And so every Sunday after he would give the benediction, he would give me the microphone. It would be off, and on our way back from the sanctuary to the office, I would regurgitate what I heard him say. And so fast forward, been literally preaching and standing behind pulpits at 15. My childhood pastor did not believe in women preachers. He told me, though, he said, I want you to have on a white shirt and a black suit and always have a sermon ready. That was at 15 years old. So that was his indirect way. At 18, I gave my father's eulogy in front of 3,000 people. Told my mother to put me down as the homily. He would do the eulogy. After I finished the homily is when he gave his public blessing and said, I believe that there's a preacher in the pulpit, and it's not just me. This baby has made me believe that God can use women preachers. That was in 2000. That was 23 years ago. From that Sunday up until the day he died, he taught me exegesis. Before I was a freshman in college. There are still, Reverend Wendy, churches in the American South that remember his declaration. His figurehead in the Baptist ministry said, hey, there's a girl. And there are still churches that I am only allowed to stand in because, one, his name is on my bio, and they remember this girl that Creasy said would make them believe in women in pastors. I mean, we're talking like up until last year.
I'm Reverend Dr. Andrea Roby, and I'm the senior pastor of Solid Rock Baptist Church in Chesapeake. I grew up in Portsmouth. I'm a PK. Okay, my father was a bishop, and of a holiness church, small Pentecostal holiness church. So, like small Pentecostal holiness churches, you are in church 24/7. But I can say this, and I wanted to say this too. I never was looking to be senior pastor. I was never looking to be senior. I wanted to preach, teach, and reach. That's all I wanted to do. I wanted to do what God had called me to do. And it just so happened that God opened up the door for me to be senior pastor. I was always, and still am, a good follower. I was always a good follower, but I would always also notice that people would be following me. So I do believe that a leader is somebody that God has gifted, and he's already called for that purpose of leading. And really, whether you want to or not, you're going to be a leader.
This irresistible, persistent tugging from God to surrender to what I felt at the time was a call to ministry. And so after a year of discerning and prayer and soul searching and just really thinking about counting the cost of what it would mean to say yes to God as a preacher, I finally went to my pastor the last Sunday in December of 1989 and told him I felt that I was being called to the ministry. And of course, he said to me, I was wondering what took you so long, because he saw that there was a call on my life long before I did. Okay. I enrolled in seminary, again, with no aspirations of pastoring, just trying to go to get the tools that I felt would be helpful to me as a preacher of the gospel. And then in 1994, as I was finishing up one of my last classes in seminary,
my pastor had a massive heart attack. And so I can remember very clearly saying to the Lord, this is not something that I would have chosen to do, but I do need to give some consideration to the fact that there are some people who I believe in my ability to lead. So if you think you can use me in this role, then you must make it abundantly clear that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Because up to this point, I had not submitted anything. The night before they were to close the application deadline, the closing of the application deadline, the chair of the pulpit committee or the search committee called me and said, we don't have your credentials. Why haven't you submitted your credentials? Yada, yada, yada. So he said, I know before you even answer, you think that the church is not ready for a female. I said, well, yeah, I'm concerned that they may not be. And I just don't know if this is something I want to do. So he said to me, he said, well, give the people a chance to decide. Don't make the decision for them. Do not rob them of the opportunity to decide if they want to call a woman.
Okay.
So I said, well, okay. He said, and I know it's close. He said, but if you'll get your packet together, I'll walk it through. And that's what he did. I got it in before the deadline. And they had about 64 applicants. And they sent all of us a questionnaire that we had to answer. It was really testing our ability to think theologically. They asked us questions about ecclesiology and soteriology and, what was the mission of the church, all those kinds of questions that really seminary had prepared me to answer. So I submitted my application. They narrowed the 64 down to 24. And out of those 24 of us, they asked us to submit letters of recommendation. And once we submitted those letters of recommendation, they narrowed the number down to 5. They interviewed the 5 of us, and then they narrowed it down to 3. And when they narrowed it down to 3, they had receptions for all of us to come to our own individual receptions where we had a chance to talk to the membership. The membership could ask us questions, and then we all preached. Ironically, the Sunday that I preached to be considered as pastor was the same Sunday. Let's see, I was elected in 95. The same Sunday, 5 years before that I preached my first sermon. So I preached my first sermon the first Sunday in February in 1990. I preached my sermon to be considered for pastor the first Sunday in February of 1995. So following that, the church voted, and I was elected by a 2/3 majority to be the pastor of the church.
Late in life, I say late because many have spoken about they're answering their call early on. I kind of knew when I was 12, but being raised in a church and told women don't do that, I just always thought I would grow up and be the person that got to sing the solo at the revivals. And then God just did his work in my heart. And I answered the call to ministry, told my husband. I thought that he was going to divorce me. He's like, why would I do that? But anyway, went and talked to my pastor, and I was the 3rd female to come forward at my church. My pastor previously did not believe that God called women to preach, but he went to ITC and heard Dr. Carolyn Knight, brought her back to our church, and he just said, God told him that if I have liberated them, who are you to keep them back? And from there, I was the 3rd female. And after that, the rest is history. Women were being licensed and ordained in our church. Our church is New Faith Church. It was a Baptist church. It is a Baptist church, but it doesn't have the name Baptist. And that's very much like my church. Calvary Christian Church is a Baptist church. Just Baptist is not in the name. But from there, I went on because I'm a lifelong learner, retired educator. I knew I needed to go to school. So I immediately enrolled in seminary and attempted seminary in between my school vacations, I guess summer vacations. From there, did my D-Min. So the question was, how did I get to the senior pastor role? I did my internship under Dr. Marcus D. Cosby, my pastor, who I passionately call my pastor because he found me. Well, I guess God directed my husband and I to Wheeler when I was really wounded by the church. And Dr. Cosby really walked me through and helped me through that wounded time. And at that time, I believed it was 2013, I believe, that I thought I heard God say to start a church. And I said, oh, no, I'm about to get divorced. I can't start a church. And I talked to Dr. Cosby. He came to the house. This was after my husband and I had been having church in our house by ourselves for about a year. And he came and established Calvary Christian Church. We signed all the documents. And from there, I became a senior pastor. And I talked to Dr. Cosby and I told him, I know that I'll probably be preaching to my husband, but I still feel like God is calling me to do this. Because I couldn't understand, Dr. Wendy, why the male counterparts that were interns with me and had been previous interns, they all got positions as senior pastors. And all the women who were interns did not get senior pastor positions. And my question was, why is God telling women to do a different type of ministry? I just felt like, well, if God is calling men to pastor, surely he's calling women to pastor. And so my journey has been that I started Calvary Christian Church. We've been online. We were online before the pandemic. We were offline. We rented spaces and, shared spaces. And we feel like we're a good church. We're not a big church, but church in every sense of the word. We come together. We forsake not the assembling of ourselves. We study the apostles' teaching and we go out and help people. And so basically that's how I got to be a senior pastor.
And so the first call is to Blessed Trinity Baptist Church. I found out about that through another minister who was part of the United Missionary Baptist Association, our local Baptist association here in the New York City area. And I applied for the position and I went through the usual process with the pulpit search committee, and they called me to be their senior pastor. I was their second pastor. The founding pastor was a male. Founded the church, if I'm not mistaken, in 1972, and he was pastor since that time. And then I was called to be the second pastor of that church.
Beautiful.
And I was there, like I said, until I was called to the St. Matthew's Baptist Church, also in Harlem, and same, thing. They called me. I found out about that position through the former pastor who was retiring. And through word of mouth, it went out. They, I applied. No, actually, that's not true. I did not apply at first because the information that went out about the pastorate asked for for the person to be married, and I was not married. I was a single mother. So being a single mother also was kind of not only unheard of for women to be pastors, but to be unmarried as well, because a lot of churches even want their men to be married.
Yes.
Me to be a woman and to have my son and to have not been wed, that was really sort of unheard of, and pretty much still is sort of like a unicorn. And so I did not apply at first because it asked for someone to be the person to be married. And when I was asked by the previous minister who asked, did I apply? I says, no, the stipulation said that they wanted someone married and I'm not married. And he says, that's a lot of nonsense. They're going to open the search up again because they've not found anyone. And they're going to take that out of their description. And so I did apply, and I did what you do. They asked you to come and preach and look at your record and all those sorts of things and references. And then I was called to the St. Matthew's Baptist Church in 2013. I don't take it for granted, absolutely not. But I'm one of those people that I guess when I feel that I'm called to do anything in this world, it is matter of fact for me. And so when people tell me no, My mother called me hard-headed and stubborn. When people tell me no, I really don't hear them. I really don't. It's like, and so my journey, has gone through everything from being kicked out of a church when my son, because I was an unwed mother, so I was kicked out of the Baptist church because I was not married at that time, while my son's father was allowed to remain in church as minister of music. And so it was a very interesting time, 29 years ago, when I found myself, and I remember I was not in ministry at all. So having a child, I was not in ministry. I was not called to ministry. I didn't minister, let alone pastor. Like, what are you talking about? None of this was anywhere on the radar. But people at that time had asked, how are you going to stay in a church? It's supposed to be a place for love. And, God just dealt with me. And I have been Baptist all my life. And I've, whatever it is that I've gone through has been so that others could have an easier way in this life as other women in ministry, as I move forward.
I never desired to be a senior pastor. I was in the area of Christian education. And so my first jobs, if you will, paid positions at churches was as a minister of Christian education. And my first job was part-time. And then I was called to be with a new pastor who had been there about 1.5 years, I think. And it was a relatively large church, Dr. Darrell Rollins at 31st Street. And he, I guess, had heard of my work in the area of Christian education. And so when he went to the church, he wanted to revamp the Christian education ministry there. And so I went as a Christian education minister. And it was there in that role that, unknowing to me, God was preparing me to do pastoral work. And so I began to just naturally, I guess, pastor people, through counseling, through, it was there within, I guess, about 9 months, I became he elevated me to become an associate pastor. And so I was baptizing people. I was doing a lot of teaching, a lot of preaching. And then, of course, that led to counseling. And I was with him for 10 years. That was the most powerful experience that prepared me for pastoring, because in those 10 years, he first of all went back to school and completed. He had a honorary doctorate, and he went back to Howard and finished his DMin and got the earned doctorate. During the 10 years I was with him, he went to be the dean of Shaw. He took a stint where he was instrumental in getting them reaccredited. And during the 10 years I was with him, he was sick. He became sick. And in fact, right before I left to become a pastor, he was very sick. And God gave the vision for me to pastor. And as soon as I got that vision, it was revealed that he was sick to the point that he was going to need a transplant, an organ transplant, in order to live. And one of the things I knew is that God did not want me to leave that congregation at that critical time. And so for a whole year, I had to sit with a vision that God had given me. And God promised that what God had the vision God had given was going to come to fruition, as well as my pastor was going to be healed. And so he received his transplant at the latter part of November. And of course, the only thing I could say was, God, you said, and as God would have it, making the story, condensing it, as God would have it, it was interesting because in that year, the first Sunday in January came in on a Sunday. which means that I preached the watch night service. And that next Sunday, my pastor was able to be in the pulpit to preach. He had the transplant in late November. And as God would have it, he came home in 7 days. When he came home, I went to visit him and revealed the vision that God had given to me. And he received it with great joy and support. And he asked me to stay with him for the first quarter of 1995, which I did. And so he preached the first Sunday in January. When we went to the church meeting in January, he, revealed what God had shared and encouraged people that wanted to go with me. And they voted also to pay my salary for the first year that the church planted. So, but those 10 years were critical. And, I think that's the way to onboard, and that's the route to succession too. Yeah.
All right. My name is Ayanna Franklin. I am the pastor of Ray of Hope Baptist Church in Baltimore, Maryland. I've been the senior pastor there for almost 2 years now. I came into ministry after my husband passed in 2019. It was not a planned succession. My church is actually celebrating its 45th anniversary this year. The church was founded by my father-in-law in 1978. And after he fell ill, my husband succeeded his father. Both have now gone on to glory, and there was a strong, I think all of us who enter into ministry know that tug on your spirit, on your heart, that comes in a way that you can no longer ignore it. And I was very much in the process of, assisting our board, preparing for a search for a new pastor. This would have been a new process for our church at this point. Again, still kind of suppressing whatever God was saying to me. And it came by way of two senior pastors who were serving as kind of in a consultant role for us. They were familiar with our church. They were very familiar with my father-in-law, with my husband. And so they had led churches in transition before. And so we had consulted with them. And what I was feeling, the calling that I was having, was then confirmed through them. And one of them has just recently transitioned. Great mentor, great man of faith, Reverend A.C.D. Vaughn. And my other mentor is Dr. John Lund Sr. And so through that started the kind of traditional path for, preparation in the Baptist church. So there was, preparation for my initial sermon, which then took place in 2020, January of 2020. The pandemic came in March 2020. So I kind of started my ministry right there in the midst of the pandemic, simultaneously went back to school to earn the second master's in theology and Christian leadership, while preparing for ordination. And so all of those traditional paths, your ordination process, your vote for your church voting. So that was the final, the presentation to the board as a candidate, and then my church voting. And I was installed in July of 2021.